Welcome to the channel. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Now join me on today's video where I'll be doing the full review on the Matic SKX 007 Homages. Now as you guys saw in the unboxing, I was very impressed by how these watches initially looked. Love the pictures, and as I mentioned in the unboxing, I had to pay a small fee for these watches, and then they were sent to me basically for free. Now as you can tell with the thumbnail, I have given away my thoughts and my final opinion on this watch. Yes, it is a huge shame. After looking at these watches in great detail, I can't help but say these watches, they're a bit of a disappointment overall. So hopefully in this review I can take you through all the finer details and let you know why I think it is such a disappointment. In the unboxing I did cover dimensions, so I'll just go over them really quickly. You got a diameter of 42 millimeters. You do have a case thickness of 17.2. Now this is a point to pause thickness on this watch is the same more or less as those MM300 homages that you get from Proxima, heimdallr, etc. So it's meant to be a, let's say, a mid-size diver, but the thickness on it is of definitely a massive watch. Lug to lug is quite compact. It's 46 millimeters. The price of this watch is going to set you back around $190 or £130, which is not a bad price, but you got to remember at that price point it is extremely competitive. There's a lot of watches out there. I think one popping to mind, a newcomer, Seestern. I've been looking at their watches recently and they're in that right price mark. So yeah, they've really got to do something special with this. I think the ingredients are there, but that dish that turned out just didn't taste right. So let's have a quick look at specifications. You got a Seig Epson NH35 movement, full stainless steel case, bezel, bracelet construction. You do have a quadruple dome sapphire crystal. I'm only messing. It's a double dome, quite a high dome, top hat. Box style sapphire crystal, which gives it that excessive height. You do have some air coating present on the sapphire crystal, and you do have apparently 300 meters of water resistance. Where did Matic go wrong? Well, as I mentioned in the unboxing, that I gave you guys a little story. I'd been in touch with Flamma about a year ago when I reviewed one of their first models, and the owner of Flamma said they were interested in making a SKX homage. They were quite popular at that time. So number one, I think they are a touch too late in making an SKX homage, but he has tried to counteract that by giving us a 3 o'clock crown position on both cases. So that's slightly different. Now, if you don't know, FYI, Matic, as I like to call it, is an offshoot from Flamma. Let's call it the sister brand. Same guy, and just making a different brand. So you will find a lot of watches from Flamma have actually just been toupeed over across to Matic on the AliExpress store. So back to this watch now. So where have they gone wrong? Well, let's have a look at the dial first and foremost. The dial is still impressive. That's one of the good bits. The dial is really well done. As you can tell, it does have a yin and yang sort of flex going on. But of course, it's homaging the 5KX Brian May special or limited edition that Seiko came out with. Now, looking at the smaller textures, the finer details, let's zoom in slightly. It is a really well done dial, especially the red one. There is a lot of texture on here. Almost looks like a wood grain effect, which I really do like. So the quality of the dial is actually something which you'd rarely find at this price range. You've got the applied logo, which I have to say, I do really like the text and the font, the way they've done that. That looks really good, and it is applied to the dial. The hour markers are also applied. You've got a polished frame around all the hour markers. Again, really good. And the hands are nice and large, very cleanly done, fully polished. There's no chamfer or anything like that. However, they are really well made. And of course, moving on to the white dial, you'll find a very similar construction. If I turn the watch towards the light, you will see that line that goes across there is slightly glossy. So it does split that dial up. And again, similar things. Polished hour markers, really nice and large. Of course, very SKX-like. And same thing with the hands, black outline, really bold hands. I like that seconds hand, good proportions, and everything else on the face of it looks really good. So that is still quite impressive. You do also have a slight frame on the red dial around the date. You've got a color matched date wheel in black, so great contrast with the side of the dial and the red. It also does have a slight gradient towards the bottom. It does go towards a black at the bottom. Now back on the white, no date frame present, but you do have the black date wheel. So as I was saying, the ingredients are there. There is a lot of things that they have done right. But back to my question, where did they go wrong? If we actually take a closer look at the die, you'll start seeing the defects. So first and foremost, on both dials, the chapter ring is slightly off. As you can see, it's not aligned at the 12 and it's okay at the 6 on the red dial. Going back to the white dial, you'll see it's slightly off on the 12, the chapter ring, and slightly off at the 6. So that made me look at the other hour markers, and what you'll notice is the hour markers on your left hand side of the watch seem slightly further away from the chapter ring than they do on the right hand side. Very, very subtle, might I add, but it is quite visible. And I found a similar situation on this red dial. As you can see, there's just slight more of a gap on the left hand side than there is on the right hand side. Now, the more you look at the dial, small things just start jumping out at you. I think the dials are just a touch off kilter. I could be wrong, but the dial does look slightly rotated. That's a little more clear on the white dial, where you can see the 12 o'clock hour marker, especially when it goes down to the tip, seems slightly to the left. I did look at these dials in quite a lot of detail, because at one point, you don't know what you're looking at. Maybe I'm making things up, but I was quite sure that there's something just not right on the alignment. Added to the chapter ring, I think the dial is slightly off as well. So there's nothing worse than that, especially when they are just very, very subtle things which are slightly off. It just doesn't look right. The other thing that you will notice with the red dial is the lume on the hands is a slightly off-white color, and it doesn't really suit the rest of the dial. I don't know what they were trying to do here. I think on camera it looks a lot paler than it is in real life. It does have more of a creamier tinge to it, which does make it look quite different to the rest of the dial, so it doesn't really work. Now, another issue when you look closer at the hour markers, you'll see that the lume is not centered. It seems like this lume has been applied to the hour markers, sort of like stickers. So you can see on the circular markers, it isn't fully centered, and you can see that quite a lot more when you look at the white one. Just have a look at the 6 o'clock marker, where the lume is really to the top left hand corner, and again on the 12 o'clock marker, it just doesn't seem right. So as I said, all these things added together, it just doesn't look right visually. It's just something really, really off. Now, I don't know if you can see, there's also a hair in the crystal, which is quite visible, but we'll get on to that later when we look at QC issues. So let's go ahead, check out the lume. So the lume isn't too bad. You can see it is C3, the bezel inserts loomed, so are the dial and the hands. Not too bad. You do see some fading of the lume at the 12 to 10 o'clock markers, just ever so slight. And as I said, and the lume isn't the best, but it isn't the worst also. It is visible, just not super bright as you'd expect, being applied markers, but the lume actually applied on the markers is quite thin. The lume on the bezel insert is really good. There's no issues with that. And if I were to just compare it with my own SKX 007, you'll see where they really stand. Of course, the SKX uses LumiBright, so it will be a lot brighter, a lot greener, and yeah, so not the best, but not the worst either. Now, moving away from the dial, as I mentioned about the sapphire crystal, it is a top hat box style crystal with a hyperdome on there, which really does add too much to the thickness of the watch. But what you'll notice, the AR coating is okay, it's not excessive, there's just the right amount on there. Now, moving on to the case finish, what you'll see around the lugs is it has been brushed quite fine as well. It's difficult to tell the grain, but you can just about make out that is circular brushing just along the tips, and that does sort of phase into a highly polished side. The reason I say it's sort of phased in, you can't really see a clear cut definition or transition between the brushing and the polishing. Now, if I were to take a closer look, I think you might see slight overrun on there. Yeah, so it's a bit hazy. It's not as clearly defined as we see on a lot of other cases. However, the case is built quite well, very smooth. As I said, polished sides. Let's flip it over to the case back. And we've got a pretty standard case back, fully sterile, no logos, no nothing on there. The back of the case back is fully polished. And yeah, so now let's look at the differences between the two. Now, of course, as I said, they both are 3 o'clock, but one has crown guards and one doesn't. Now, the one without the crown guards, I think the failing is in the design there. As you can see, the crown is totally the wrong shape for the case, because once you do screw it down, you are left with this rather hideous gap. It's not something you want to see. If you are going godless on a case, you want the crown to sort of sit in that recess, so it does look finished. This just looks quite poor, like it's definitely missing something, and that's definitely something you don't want to see. The case does have drill lugs though, which is a bonus, but yeah, that's just sticks out like a sore thumb on that case. Moving over to the one with the crown cards, that does look a lot better. Let's screw that crown in. You do have a different crown. It is knurled as opposed to this one with the splines. So good grip. I mean, the crown tubes are fine as well. It does screw in, screw out absolutely fine. No issues there. But however, on this one, I think the crown guards are just a bit thick. The majority of the thickness is towards the bottom end. Whereas if I show you on the SKX, this do taper down quite a bit, so you can get your fingers over the crown. I think the crown guards guard the crown a little bit too much on this case, but still not too bad. It looks good. You also get a sort of a samurai sort of look on here with that knurled crown. Drill lugs again on this one, very similar finishing as it is on the white, the crown guards being the only difference. So let's look at the bezel. Again, the slight difference between the cases. So this case with the red dial does come with a knurled bezel which matches the crown. It's really good. I like that they've done that, and you've got a polished edge around the bezel. You do have a ceramic bezel insert, as you saw, is fully loomed. Moving on to the white dial, and you'll see the same ceramic bezel insert, fully loomed of course, polished edge off the bezel, but this is a coin edge style, so slightly different. And again, they've used this to try and match the crown, which I get the concept, but just that crown is just wrong for the case, unfortunately. Fully polished coin edge bezel. And now let's check the main thing, the rotation. So 120 click unidirectional bezel. So the sound is rather muted on this. The bezel does line up really well. There's no playback, there's no bounce or movement in there, but I'd just say the sound could be better. It's quite a bit muted. You do get the occasional hot spot as well. So around when it comes to the 7 or 8 o'clock marker, it just gets slightly stiffer. So not the worst, definitely not the best. Could do with a lot of room for improvement. Now let's see how the bezel is on this red dial. So is there any play in there? No play, but you do have a touch of back play, I think I felt. Nothing significant, you know, nothing bad, just a very slight bit of playback. Again, very muted, a bit of a hot spot around there. Yeah, slightly getting stuck. The grip's okay, it is knurled, but it does seem to slip on the fingers. Yeah, I gotta say, I'm not a fan of that bezel. I think there's the mechanism used on these watches, it has been developed enough for you to get a decent sounding bezel. So yeah, not ideal between both. They both do function very similar. So at least there's consistency, whether it's good or bad. But yeah, they do need to improve on that, refine that rotation a lot more. So let's move on to the actual bracelet. By far, one of the things that does stand out on this watch is the bracelet. And again, when you lift the watch up, it does feel very bracelet heavy. So why is that? Let's look at the weight. Now the overall weight of the watch is around 215 grams, which is absolutely madness. It's a very heavy watch. To put it into perspective, this is only around 190 grams, and this is a hefty watch. But this Matic, with, you know, the sapphire crystal and the case back and that case, and of course this bracelet as well, it just adds too much weight. Now the weight isn't proportional. So the case is around 99 grams or 98 grams, and the bracelet itself is actually 115 grams. So the bracelet far outweighs the case, so it will give you this off-weight feel on the watch. In hand, the bracelet definitely overtakes the weight on the case, so the weight distribution is wrong. Usually you know, as I said, these watches aren't supposed to be that big anyway, and the bracelets do need to be slightly slimmer. As you can see, the links, although fully solid end links, solid links, they are quite thick and quite large. There's not much of a taper on there, if any. The finishing is quite good, to be honest. You know, fully brushed, and you've got brushed sides, so they've looked at that aspect, and the brushing does really match well with the case, but it just does not feel right in hand, I gotta say. But I have sized this. I've took out 3 links on each side, and the weight's come down to around 183 grams, which is still quite heavy. Just coming in just under these MM300 homages, which again, it's just too thick. You do have a milk clasp, which is a bonus on there. I suppose that's a good thing, but it's a standard milk clasp. These are kind of getting old news now. We have seen a few better clasps coming out from AliExpress. You do have 3 micro adjusts, and you also do have a dive extension, although a flimsy one, just a piece of, you know, folded metal, but still better than none. And I suppose they get some good points for that, to have a dive extension. That's great. But let me show you something, guys. Let me actually show you something. Do you need one on this watch? So I've got a 6.5 inch wrist, you guys know that. But if I take this one, which is unsized, I can literally slip this on my wrist. So there's no need for a dive extension. I think this will fit a wrist size, God knows, up to maybe 9.5 inches, maybe. And I still have loads of slack here. But yeah, so the bracelets doesn't really help this watch. You also have a split pin that hold these links together. Now, the thing with split pins, they're okay to a certain point, but this watch is quite thick. But this bracelet is quite thick and heavy, and therefore you get too much flexibility in this style bracelet. Jubilee style bracelets, etc., they're okay. They're meant to be flexible, but on these 3-link bracelets, you shouldn't have too much flexibility. It gives it a jingle jangle. The bracelet comes across very flimsy, like I said, although it's solid, but it just feels too fat, too thick, too heavy for this watch. If I just show you the watch like this, it just doesn't look right. The size, I mean, the bracelet is for a much bigger watch, in my opinion, but the watch isn't that big, or it shouldn't be that big, so the bracelet does need to be a lot smaller. So yeah, it's just, it just doesn't feel right. And let me put this on wrist for you guys. And as I said, once sized, it does come down to around 183 grams. The bracelet therefore goes down to about 85 grams. So on wrist, it's actually not too bad. It fits okay, and although large, the case is actually quite comfortable. So the lug to lug, as I said, very compact, and the weight does slightly even out on the wrist, but you can still feel a bit of a weight imbalance on the watch. The crown guards, again, don't look too bad. That 3 o'clock crown is actually okay. You can get used to it. And I gotta say, that red dial looks stunning, and so does this actually black and white dial. Looks really good. I love that contrast. So let's summarize. Yeah, so I've broken it down into good, bad, and basically QC issues. You know, the bad being things which are not related to QC, just how the watch has been produced, and QC, that's self-explanatory. So what's good about it? As I said, the dial and the hands. The dials are really good. I love how they look. I love the quality of the dial. It's only when they've applied lume and they've put the dial with the chapter ring where you get all the misalignments. The case finish is decent, right? Like I said, I've seen better. The transition lines aren't as crisp and clean as you'd like, but because they're a bit, you know, hazy, it's quite difficult to tell them apart. The AR coating's okay, you know, it's not excessive. I do like that. And the lume, like I said, it's not the worst lume I've seen. It's not the best also, so it's somewhere in the middle. With regards to what's bad, so the first thing, let's start off with what's bad, is the bracelet. Right, too flimsy, too big. The case, including the sapphire, the whole design of this case is too thick. It's way too heavy for what it is, should be. It should be a lot lighter than this. It doesn't definitely need to shed some weight. Also on the case, without the crown guards, the crown is totally wrong for it. Massive gap there, which yeah, it doesn't look nice, does it? Let's be honest, it shouldn't be there. And what else in terms of bad? And yes, the hands on this slightly off color. Maybe you can see it's just too yellowy compared to the rest of the dial. Now, QC issues, they had a lot. Probably I've had a lot of QC issues on these watches. I don't think I've had so many QC issues on a watch ever. So as you guys saw, the dial misalignment, including the chapter ring, the lume not applied on the markers properly, and also the possibility of the dial just not being dead centered. You also have a issue on this which I haven't mentioned here, but if you're watching the review you probably would have spotted it, and that is this crown. I think the stem was too short on this, because once you do pop it out, set the time, it doesn't want to pop back in. And as a modder, I find that the stem is just engaging, so I think the stem is just a touch too short. So you have to, in order to engage it, you have to screw it down, but of course then you can't set the time. You also saw that bit of hair or fiber under the crystal, no good. And the bezel action, you know, again, poor QC. So quite a fair few issues for a watch that's £130. I would expect these issues on a watch that's £50–60, but that's quite unfair to a lot of the brands that do watches at that price point, because generally they don't have this many. I'd like to think this is maybe a one-off from Matic. Yes, they're new, they're just coming into the market, and this isn't apparent across the other watches, you know, the ones that have two paid over from Leader. But again, those are tried and tested. This is totally new from them. It's basically effectively a new watch from them. So yeah, there's a lot of things to improve on. Now, on that note, I did, before this review, reach out to the brand owner of Matic. You know, gave the positives and the negatives. I gave them all. And the response was that they are looking to make a much smaller crystal. But I think even with a smaller and a more low profile crystal, they'll struggle to get this under 14mm, which is still kind of thick, but you know, it's okay. And they also said that the bezel has also been improved. But you know, I can only take their word for it, or it will be improved. Sorry, let me clarify that. They are going to improve the crystal and the bezel rotation. But until then, you know, the other QC aspects, I don't know how far they're willing to go, and I don't know the amount of feedback they got, because this is relatively new. I think there's only been a handful of orders on their store, so we don't really know what the consistency is like. But amongst these two watches, I gotta say, it's not good. It just, like I said, a lot of potential, but you know, ultimately when you look at it a bit closer, it's just so wrong, and it is such a shame. Extremely disappointed, because I was expecting wonders from this watch. Leader to date have never let me down. They've always been very, very impressive for the money that they can offer their watches at. But yeah, so that's my review. You know, I didn't want to rant, and I didn't want to just go in hardcore on this brand. You know, I like to always give a fair trial to all the watches that I review. So hopefully you found this informative, and yeah, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you for watching.